Imagine being handed the most important mission of your entire life.
Right.
And, you're given a direct guarantee of success by a higher power.
Which pretty rare.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
then, and this is the wild part, on your way to do the exact job you're commissioned for, that same higher power ambushes you on a dusty road and literally tries to kill you.
Yeah, it reads like a horror movie.
It really does. Welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. Today, we are unpacking a sermon that looks at one of the most bizarre, contradictory, and frankly cinematic passages in ancient literature.
We are looking really closely at the end of Exodus chapter 4.
Yeah.
And as a source text, honestly, it is usually just skipped over because it's incredibly uncomfortable.
For sure.
It completely interrupts a very famous triumphant narrative with this incredibly dark, violent roadside incident. But the sermon we are analyzing today uses this exact strangeness to map out this massive framework.
Yeah, right. A framework about human resistance, fear, and how identity actually works. And our mission for this deep dive is to basically extract that framework for you. And I want to say right up front, you do not need a theological background to follow along with this.
Not at all.
The themes this sermon draws out, like paralyzing imposter syndrome or slamming into inexplicable failure when you're just trying to do the right thing, those are universally human.
Yeah. Discovering who you are at your core is something everyone wrestles with.
Yeah.
And the sermon treats this ancient text not just as, historical reporting, but as a mirror for the modern psychology of duty and self-worth.
Right.
It breaks the narrative into a really distinct pattern of how individuals are sent, how they face hardened resistance, how they're claimed, confronted, and ultimately how they respond.
Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with the sheer psychological weight of answering a calling.
Yeah, because we're picking up the text right after the famous burning bush scene.
Right, where Moses has just spent an exhausting amount of time throwing every possible excuse at God.
He essentially begged to be disqualified.
He really did. He was like, send literally anyone else. But now he is finally making the trek back to Egypt, which is the exact geography he fled from as a wanted man years earlier.
And what's really striking in the sermon's analysis here is the complete lack of a hero swagger.
Oh, totally.
Moses doesn't march back with this newfound confidence. The text actually shows him speaking super vaguely to his father-in-law, Jethro.
He's just like, hey, I'm just going to go see if my relatives are still alive.
Exactly. He is so cautious, and he is carrying his ordinary, completely normal shepherd's staff.
Right, but the sermon makes a really specific point about that staff, because it's suddenly referred to in the text as the staff of God.
Yes.
But why the name change? I mean, the wood hasn't magically altered, right?
No, the physical wood is exactly the same.
Yep.
The sermon points out that it's entirely about the presence behind the instrument.
Ah, okay.
The speaker actually references the theologian John Calvin here.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, noting Calvin's observation that God deliberately chooses weak, totally unimpressive instruments.
Which feels completely counterintuitive.
It does. But the logic presented is that if the tool is obviously inadequate, like a literal stick, any resulting success must clearly be attributed to the wielder of the tool.
Right, to God, rather than the stick itself.
Exactly.
Which kind of implies that being unqualified isn't a bug in the system.
No, it's the required feature.
Which immediately brings modern imposter syndrome to mind for me. Because, I mean, think about it. We constantly wait until we feel 100% prepared.
Right? Oh, absolutely.
Or we wait until the fear completely evaporates before we make a major life pivot. We want all the green lights to be on before we step on the gas.
Yeah, we want the guarantee that we're good enough first. But the sermon argues that this text entirely upends that modern instinct.
How so?
There is this defining quote from the message that really stuck out. The speaker says, God does not call the ready. He readies the called.
Wow. I love that. He readies the called.
Right. Obedience in this framework is not the absence of fear.
Yeah.
It is physical movement in spite of it. Moses is literally moving forward toward Egypt while still carrying his massive reluctance.
And the sermon actually draws a parallel here to the New Testament, right?
It does. It notes how Christ willingly walked toward the cross despite the impending agony. The movement toward the impossible, difficult task. That is the obedience.
It's not about feeling brave. It's just about putting one foot in front of the other.
Exactly. And it introduces this really foundational view of grace. God doesn't wait for Moses to become this fearless, polished warrior before utilizing him.
Right. And when Moses is told that the men seeking his life back in Egypt are dead, The sermon suggests this isn't just a political update.
No, it's so much bigger than that. The past no longer has a legal claim on him. The sermon says Moses is stepping out of his personal history and stepping into a theology.
Stepping into a divine plan that is already in motion.
Precisely.
Okay, so if identity and calling provide the fuel, you'd think the path forward would be totally clear from here.
You would think so.
But the sermon points out a massive immediate collision course, because before Moses even reaches the Egyptian border, God promises him stubborn failure.
Yeah, immediate resistance.
God literally says, I will harden Pharaoh's heart so that he will not let the people go.
Right.
And I have to stop here because to a modern ear, this sounds incredibly deterministic.
It does. It really pushes some buttons.
Yeah. I mean, if the sermon is saying God is hardening Pharaoh's heart from the jump, isn't the game totally rigged? Why send Moses on this anxiety-inducing mission just to guarantee his initial failure?
What's fascinating here is how the sermon refuses to apologize for that exact tension.
Really? It doesn't try to smooth it over?
Not at all. It doesn't attempt to solve the philosophical problem of free will versus divine sovereignty.
Okay.
Instead, it presents two simultaneous realities that are both found in the text.
Which are?
On one hand, Pharaoh acts willfully and defiantly as a real human with agency, hardening his own heart.
Yeah, he's making choices.
Yes. But at the exact same time, God is also sovereignly hardening Pharaoh's heart.
It just embraces the paradox rather than solving it for the listener.
It really does. And to explain the why behind this, the sermon looks to the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 9.
Okay, what's the argument there?
The argument presented is that God raised Pharaoh up specifically to display his ultimate power.
Interesting.
Yeah. And the sermon uses this to dismantle our modern assumption that doing the right thing brings immediate, frictionless success.
Oh, man. We all assume that, don't we?
Oh, completely. But in this theological framework, resistance is not a detour from the plan. The resistance is the plan.
That completely reframes the whole concept of failure for you.
How so?
Well, if you speak truth, or you step forward into what you think is your calling and you just slam into a brick wall of opposition, you might not be doing anything wrong.
Exactly. According to the sermon, you could be exactly in the center of the will of God.
That is wild.
It is. The premise is that God rules even over the hardest hearts. And the speaker actually draws a direct line from this Egyptian resistance to the crucifixion of Jesus, referencing Acts chapter 2.
Okay, I see where this is going.
Yeah, the argument is that the greatest act of human rebellion condemning and crucifying Christ was actually delivered up according to a definite, foreordained plan.
So the narrative function of God telling Moses about the hardened heart beforehand, it's actually protective.
Protective. Tell me more about that.
Well, think about it. If Moses goes in expecting a red carpet, the very first no from Pharaoh is going to send him running right back to the devil.
Oh, for sure. He'd crumble.
Right, but the expectation of resistance provides the stamina to actually endure it.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Which leads directly to the core message that Moses is actually instructed to deliver.
Yeah, because to endure that level of political and spiritual opposition, you need a really unshakable foundation.
You do. And God doesn't give Moses a list of labor demands to present to Pharaoh.
No, it's not a negotiation about working conditions.
Right. Instead, he gives him a stunning declaration of identity.
Israel is my firstborn son. Let my son go. Here's where it gets really interesting, because if you look at Israel in the text at this moment, they do not look like a firstborn son.
No, they look like oppressed, forgotten slaves.
Exactly. They have zero royal standing. They are at the absolute bottom of the social hierarchy.
And to understand the weight of this claim, we really have to look at how the title of firstborn son functioned in the ancient Near East.
Okay.
It wasn't merely about birth order. It was a formal legal status.
Like an inheritance thing.
Exactly. The firstborn carried the inheritance, the ultimate privilege, and the authority to literally represent the father.
Wow.
And the sermon really emphasizes that Israel did absolutely nothing to earn this title.
Right. They weren't particularly righteous. They weren't powerful.
Not at all. It is presented as an act of pure, unmerited covenant grace. God simply chooses to attach his name to them.
Think about how that plays out on a human level. It's like a parent stepping into a huge dispute on a playground.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right. That parent doesn't pause to evaluate if their child is currently covered in mud or crying or even misbehaving. The parent just steps right in and says, "That is my kid."
Yes.
They lay an absolute non-negotiable claim to them. God isn't negotiating labor terms with Pharaoh. He is asserting a rightful claim over his family.
That's spot on. And the sermon connects this ancient claim all the way forward to the Gospel of Matthew.
How does it do that?
Well, it acknowledges the historical reality that Israel, as a nation, ultimately fails to live up to the responsibilities of being the firstborn son.
Right, they end up grumbling and rebelling in the wilderness for years.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Matthew chapter 2 notes that Jesus is called out of Egypt. The sermon's theological stance here is that Jesus steps into history as the true, perfect son.
Who succeeds where the nation failed.
Yes, he obeys perfectly and bears the judgment that they incurred.
And the sermon applies this directly to your sense of self as a listener, right?
It really does.
It suggests that identity must always precede action, which is so huge. Because if you operate from a mindset of deficit, like, say, a slave trying to earn approval or an employee terrified of being fired, obedience feels like a crushing burden.
Oh, it's exhausting.
Yeah.
But if you understand yourself to be claimed and loved with this covenant love, the motivation entirely shifts.
You're acting as an heir.
Exactly. You already possess the inheritance, so obedience becomes a natural response to who you are, rather than this frantic attempt to become someone.
Which brings us back to that incredibly violent roadside ambush we mentioned at the start of the deep dive.
Right. The tonal shift here is crazy.
It really is, because we have this soaring, beautiful language about the firstborn son and unmerited grace. Moses is on the road. He's carrying the staff of God.
He's on a mission.
And then the narrative just slams on the brakes. The sermon shifts to this deeply unsettling line, "The Lord met him and sought to put him to death."
It is incredibly jarring. And this raises an important question about the nature of ancient covenants and divine holiness.
Yeah, because to a modern reader, it seems completely unhinged.
It does. But the sermon explains that Moses, the very man chosen to mediate God's covenant with Israel, has fundamentally neglected to keep the sign of that covenant in his own home.
He has failed to circumcise his son.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack the mechanics of that, because, again, to a modern listener, a violent, lethal, divine response over a missed medical procedure seems completely disproportionate.
I know, it sounds extreme. But in the ancient world, a covenant was not a casual handshake.
Right.
It was a binding treaty, often involving literal matters of life and death, and required a physical, visible marker.
Okay, and this sign of circumcision was established generations earlier, right?
Yes, with Abraham in Genesis chapter 17. So by ignoring it, Moses wasn't just forgetting a cultural tradition, he was actively breaking the foundational treaty with the God he was supposed to represent.
Wow.
The sermon uses this to illustrate a really hard theological rule. Obedience is not optional, especially for leadership.
You can carry the staff, you can have the grand calling, but if you ignore the terms of the treaty in your own life, you place yourself directly under judgment. It shows that unmerited grace still comes with non-negotiable terms of obedience. God isn't casual about his own holiness.
No, he's not. And in the midst of this terrifying roadside judgment, it is Moses' wife, Zipporah, who intervenes.
Yeah, she saves him.
She does. She urgently takes a flint knife, performs a circumcision on their son, and touches Moses with the blood.
And she declares him a bridegroom of blood.
Yes.
That phrase, bridegroom of blood, is so visually striking. How does the sermon explain the function of the blood in this specific moment?
Well, the blood is what averts the judgment.
Okay.
The sermon's core argument here is that Moses' life is preserved not by his special status and not by his impressive resume.
Right.
It's preserved by the physical shedding of blood to satisfy the terms of the broken covenant. The blood physically stands between Moses and death.
And the speaker links this directly to Christian theology, right? This is a massive parallel.
It is. The sermon draws a profound parallel from this dusty roadside in Exodus straight to the cross in the New Testament.
How does that map out?
The framework presented is that all humanity is under judgment for failing the covenant. But rather than demanding our blood, Jesus sheds his own blood.
Wow.
Yeah, the sermon posits that Christ's sacrifice doesn't just, delay divine judgment. It fully satisfies it. It preserves the lives of those who are covered by it.
It takes this bizarre, terrifying scene and turns it into a fundamental lesson about the necessity of a substitute.
Exactly.
You just cannot stand in the presence of ultimate holiness without being cleansed.
It is a really sobering reminder presented by the sermon that deliverance has a severe cost. It isn't cheap.
Okay, so having survived this judgment through the shedding of blood, Moses and his brother Aaron finally arrive in Egypt.
They finally make it.
And they gather the elders of Israel. And keep in mind, these people have endured centuries of silence from God.
400 years.
Right, so Moses speaks the words of the covenant. He shows the miraculous signs with the staff. And the elders' reaction, it completely defies our modern logic.
It really does. Because the text just simply states, they believed and they bowed their heads and worshipped.
Which is crazy.
Yeah.
Because they are still enslaved.
Yeah, nothing has actually changed yet.
They are still suffering under a brutal regime. Not a single whip has been lowered, no plagues have struck Egypt, and not one chain has fallen off.
But they bow their heads in worship anyway.
Yes.
To highlight how radical this is, the sermon employs this amazing quote from Martin Luther.
Oh, I love this part.
He says, faith clings to the word of God even when sight has not yet caught up.
That is so good, even when sight has not yet caught up.
Right. If we map out the psychological pattern the sermon is tracking here, it functions totally sequentially. God speaks the promise, the people choose to believe it, and then their hearts bow in worship.
And that is entirely backwards to how modern society operates.
Totally backwards.
We demand a seeing is believing approach. We wait for the circumstances to improve, or for the bank account to fill up, or for the health diagnosis to clear before we express any gratitude.
Oh, absolutely.
We want the receipt before we pay the compliment.
We want visible proof. The sermon, however, argues that within this biblical framework, true belief must precede the actual deliverance.
Belief comes first.
Right. If the promise has been spoken by a sovereign power, the outcome is considered absolutely certain, even if you are currently sitting in the dark, still bearing the weight of the chains.
So what does this all mean?
Well, the sermon ultimately brings this entire Exodus journey to a conclusion by mapping it onto the Christian practice of communion, the table.
It suggests that this weird, choppy story in Exodus chapter 4 is actually a blueprint for the entire gospel narrative.
Exactly. The pattern holds up completely. Sent, hardened, claimed, confronted, worship.
Let's track that. So individuals are sent into a world that actively resists them.
Right.
They face hardened hearts, often their own, honestly.
Yes, very true.
They are claimed by an unearned, sweeping grace rather than their own merit or resume.
And then they are confronted by the sobering reality that their failures require a massive cost.
A cost, the sermon argues, was paid by Christ.
Exactly.
And the only logical conclusion to realizing you've been spared from that judgment is to just bow your head.
The deliverance is not cheap. It requires conflict, deep obedience, and sacrifice. The sermon really challenges the listener to view their own standing through that lens of profound gratitude.
And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over today, building on that incredible image of the elders worshiping before their chains were actually broken.
It's such a powerful image.
I want you to consider, what Egypt are you currently sitting in right now? What is the waiting room you find yourself stuck in, where the circumstances haven't changed and the resistance is still incredibly loud?
Because that is the ultimate test of where you place your trust.
Exactly. If true faith clings to the word before sight catches up, what would it look like for you to change your posture today? What would it look like to wake up tomorrow, still in your Egypt, still dealing with the same problems, but operating with the unshakable confidence of a firstborn son?
That changes everything.
To just bow your head and express gratitude in the waiting room, trusting that the wheels of deliverance are already turning, even if the landscape ahead still looks completely murky. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and we will see you next time.